So this is where we had stopped last time around, and the discussion yesterday was regarding the renewable energy generation capacity across the world and how the world is progressing in its clean energy and energy transition plans. What we had shown was, of course, there's this massive jump when it comes to renewables in places like China. They are looking at a near about 263% jump from where they were in 2020, right? But if you look at where India is, right, and where India is looking to jump from about 360 gigawatts or 360 terawatt hour of energy, and looking to go to about 3,500. That is an even more substantial jump. We're talking about almost a 900% jump for India. Sorry, that's 900%. And whilst people talk about China, that's about 260%. Yes, they have a much higher base, and they will get to 8,000 terawatt hour energy. But then India is not too far behind. And this is something that I want to kind of explore in this session today. Going forward, I have a few slides which will primarily focus on the renewable energy sector in India. We'll talk a little bit about gas, because in our sort of excitement and in our enthusiasm for clean energy, for wind and solar, we tend to forget that gas is a very important step, and the transition from fossil fuels or transition from thermal and coal energy onto cleaner energy will not be possible without that bridge that will have to be provided by gas. So let us at this point look at the total growth in energy demand in India, right? I've taken 4 different components. We've taken primary energy, which is the basic sort of form of energy for any country. Then I've taken the secondary sources of gas, oil, and coal. Each of these secondary sources can be used for transportation, can be used for heating, can be used for manufacturing, but the primary source of energy is completely different. If you start at around 2020, right, we see that the sort of growth in the primary source of energy, and mind you, these are all in percentage terms, because the unit of each of these is different. Primary energy is calculated in terawatt hour, gas in BCM, oil and coal in million tons of oil equivalent. And so going by that sort of percentage increase, right, we would see that the growth in the primary energy is kind of centered around 40 to, between 35 to 40%. So net, if you look at the primary sources of energy, we would see that it moves from about 880 terawatt hour in 2020 and goes up to about 1570. This translates to an increase of almost 80%, right? So this is the basic sort of building block of the energy requirement in India, that is going to go up almost 80% from 2020 up till 2040, right? Now, if you would look at, say, oil, people again talk about, the consumption of oil in India is going to go down. India is going to move away from a fossil-based economy. Oil and gas are not that important an aspect of a building block for energy sources. But if you look at the requirement of oil, we are talking, it goes from about 60 million tons per annum, goes up to about 201 million tons, right? So that is an increase today of about 75%. In terms of net, you're talking about the requirement or the growth in oil to be almost similar to the basic primary energy source. Even coal, for that matter of fact, is expected to grow up about 31% between this period. But it is gas. It is gas that is going to kind of increase from, sorry, my fault. This increase from about 5 million barrels of oil per day to about 8.7 million barrels of oil per day. My apologies. Gas is expected to go up from 60 BCM to about 201 BCM. That translates into a growth of near about 75%. This goes up to about 23%, right? So when we look at the sort of growth in gas, right, you are seeing an annual or a decade wise increase, which is tending to be near about 100%. In certain cases, we're almost doubling from 2020 to 2030. And a lot of this is due to the fact that the energy transition is taking place, that we are retiring coal as a power source. We are going steady in our oil, but whilst that increase takes place, or the growth impetus takes place in renewables and in energy, in solar, in wind, to some extent even in hydro, the base and the backup plan there is going to be gas, right? Now there are ambitions of the country, there are ambitions of the government to formulate or to transport or transform the country into what is called as the gas-based economy. And the requirements of India's gas consumption are aligned with the way the market conditions exist. All of the world's largest LNG producers, whether it is Qatar or whether it is Australia, each of them is talking about near about doubling its LNG export capacity. Even Russia, which is a primary gas supplier to Western Europe, is looking at building up LNG terminals through which it could transport, or enhancing or augmenting the existing LNG terminal capacity it has to transport LNG from places like Siberia onto their main focus, of course, is North Asia, which is Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea. But a lot of that spare gas could come into China and India as well. Now, this sort of ambition of India holds prudence, is considered to be a step in the right direction. And this would involve improving the usage of gas in every aspect of our energy mix, whether it is transportation, whether it is the power sector, whether it is the manufacturing sector, which is where gas is used in furnaces, etc., for things like heavy industries like steel manufacturing, etc., or it is used in the refining and petrochemical sector. So in the next slide, I'll show you where exactly the gas is used in India. But these are the main sort of components for usage of gas. The piped natural gas, or PNG, is primarily supplied to the households, where it is used for cooking and heating, to some extent heating, but primarily for cooking purposes. The regasified energy, LNG, is primarily imported through large LNG carriers into the country. As you'll see in the next slide, our gas requirements are about 55% met by domestically produced gas, and about 45 needs to be imported. That is going to slightly change and come to about 50-50 as India's import requirement, as India's domestic consumption increases. CNG, which is primarily used as a transport fuel, is also being extensively used in India. Most major metros in the country have dictated that the public transport, whether it is buses or taxis or auto rickshaws, need to run on CNG, and that is a growing sector as we look forward. Biomethane is an upgraded form of biogas, and that is being used extensively as a variant for the transportation fuel. We have seen pilot stations come up in the northern part of India, and that is a growing sort of focus area, not just for the government, but also for the private sector. So this is where gas is currently being utilized in the country, right? The bulk of the gas utilization, about a third of it, is utilized in the fertilizer sector, where it is gas, primarily methane, is broken down to produce urea, which is the basic building block for fertilizers. The reason for that is that the government, being supportive of the agricultural sector, gives a lot of impetus and gives a lot of subsidies for procurement of gas to be used as a fertilizer. Both fertilizer and power sectors are considered as premium sectors where the pricing is slightly different. At some stage, we could potentially go into how the pricing sector is formed. As I had kind of spoken about the about 18% of the total gas utilization goes into the power sector. India is still not very um, uh, hasn't really evolved its gas-fired power plants to a very large extent. A lot of it that has to do with the last mile connectivity, where existing gas-fired plants do not have the capacity that they need to run at 100% plant factor. The PUF, the plant utilization factor of gas-fired plants, is unfortunately less than 50%, whereas it is near about 70 to 80% for the coal-fired plants. In the previous slide, I had spoken about both CNG and PNG, which are utilized for both domestic housing as well as in the transportation sector. And this is a growth sector where the government is looking for this to increase to about 30% as they sort of give more incentives to the CGD sector. Refinery and petchem primarily use the gas as a, not just as a fuel, but also as a feed source, where the methane molecules are kind of broken down into more complex polyhydrates, polynomers, etc., in order to produce the complex mono and bipoly chains. Then you have other uses. Some of it is used in the industrial sector. Some of it is used in the heavy industry sector. But this is something that I kind of wanted to highlight, that in the very near term, right, the government or the country is looking to start usage of near about 150 MMSCMD to go up to near about 230 in the very short term. Right, this translates to a CAGR of about 7.2% per annum, which is a very, very impressive growth. And a bulk of this growth is going to come from the power sector and the CGD sector. These two sectors are expected to contribute the maximum towards the growth of the gas-based economy in India. Right now, since we're talking more about renewables, since we're talking about energy transition, let's kind of move and shift our base a little bit and talk about the power sector in India. Even today, the power sector in India is hugely focused towards the thermal power sector. I'll come to that in some time. Whilst there has been a sort of concerted effort by the government, by the Ministry of Petroleum, by the Ministry of Power. They've set up a renewables ministry to look at both coal and, to a large extent, wind power generating source in the country. It is still fairly small in terms of absolute size. The power sector utilization, or the electricity utilization in the country, is increasing. I will share that in the next slide. Due to the pandemic, there had been some breaks, there had been some slowdowns. A lot of it had to do with the last mile connectivity, where the grid completion could not take place. And it is estimated that even in the base case scenario, I discussed the base case scenario of steps which the IEA utilizes, even by 2030, right, while we would be looking at near about 3,800 terawatt hour, there could be a drop of about 500 terawatt hour, primarily because of the problems that and the operational issues that the pandemic created. Still, we are looking at near about a 5% per annum, 5% CAGR growth, going up from near about, I think this is about 116 terawatt hour, where we go to about 5,000 terawatt hour by 2015, the next 30 years. We are looking at going more than about 2.5x from 1600 to about 5,000 terawatt hour. Sorry, this is about 3x, going about 3x in the next 30 years, which is very, very impressive, right? And a bulk of this, as you will probably see from the next slide, the bulk of this is going to be coming in from solar and a little bit of wind. It is estimated that, people talk about the West, people talk about Western Europe and North America in adding their renewable capacity base, in adding power plants which run on renewable capacity. It is estimated that in about 20 years time, India would, every 20 years, we would be installing the capacity that the current European Union has, and we'd be replicating that in every 2 years. The bulk of our electric consumption comes primarily from the domestic sector, um, 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 heating both for consumer homes, buildings, which is both commercial as well as residential, as well as for factories and offices, which takes into account about 38% of our total electricity consumption. So this is where we are talking about our current sort of base, as you can see, jumps up from 1600 terawatt hour, goes up to about 5000 terawatt hour in 2050, and the bulk of this is going to come from solar. In As of today, right, our solar capacity installation is about 64 terawatt hour, right? We are looking at this going up to about 2100 terawatt hour. This translates into a whopping 3200% jump, right? And that is going to come about by both a small scale rooftop solar plants as well as large scale grid fired plants. I'll come to the economics and very briefly touch upon the tariff rates that exists. But for this jump, this nearly 400 times jump from 69 terawatt hour to 2100 terawatt hour is going to involve a lot of commitment from the current government, is going to involve participation from private players, and is going to involve a lot of investment that goes into it. It's not just solar. As you can see, there is a substantial increase in wind as well. Currently, the wind and solar are about the same. There's about 68 terawatt hour of wind generation that takes place in the country, and that is expected to go up almost 1300 times to about 916 terawatt hour. So wind energy is expected to go up by almost 1300%, right? During this, we should not forget that even other sources of energy are expected to go up. And as I had told you, natural gas kind of will grow, and we are looking at almost 150% increase going forward in the next 50 years. Unfortunately, as you can see, at least for the next 10 years and perhaps going up to the next 20 years, coal will still kind of remain a dominant force, at least for the next 10 to 15 years. Currently, coal is the most dominant form, and about 127 terawatt of hour of energy is produced from coal generation, which is expected to fall down to 947. That is going to see a minus 16% drop, right? Although this is still a drop, that we still see that there is a decent amount of coal capacity that exists in the country. And unfortunately, that is not going to change. The reason for that, and we discussed this in some detail during the call yesterday, was that India is still a growing economy. India is still a developed nation. There are parts of the country which do not get 24/7 power, and these have to be supplemented and supplied by thermal generation today, right? So this talks about the actual power that is being generated. But what about the power plants, right? Now, if you look at the current, and this is from the Ministry of Power's website, there's a paper that is available. And as of today, as of the current month, the total installed capacity in India is about 390 gigawatts, out of which a bulk of it, near about, let's say about 54% of it is coal, right? So it'll be very difficult for India to kind of kick its coal habit. Yes, the growth in solar is tremendous, But when you're starting off with a base of more than 54%, of around 54% of coal, even if you were to gradually reduce it over a period of time, coal will still remain as a at least a predominant player for the next 10-15 years, and a player for the time to come. But the good part about it is that our renewable power base, the installed capacity of green energy, as we call it, which is both solar uh, and wind, has crossed 100 gigawatts for the first time in this year. In 2020 and 2019, we were below 100. We were doing about 90-95, which I think is a great achievement. But it will take some time for this 100 to go up to 450 gigawatts. There is a commitment by the current government where they are looking at implementing near about 450 gigawatts of India's total installed capacity to come from clean and green energy. Now, it is not as if it's not doable, right? In the last 10 years, right, we have gone up from 20 to 103, right? We've gone about 5 times, and we need to do that again for the next 10 years for us to get to about 450 gigawatts. So it's not something that is not doable, but it will require the same sort of speed and implementation that we have seen in the last a couple of years to continue. What a lot of people forget is that there are a lot of there's a substantial hydroelectric projects in India. The sort of initial projects came about in the 50s and 60s, and since then we have seen large projects come up all along the Ganga, all along the Brahmaputra, and these today add about about 10% of our total energy needs comes from hydroelectric power. And by all means and by all standards, even hydroelectric is a clean source of energy, right? You can talk about the sun and the wind as being a sort of continuous form of energy insofar as the supply is concerned. But then the sun does not shine for 24 hours a day. At best, you can take about 6. In certain places in Rajasthan, about 7 hours of sun can be utilized for harnessing energy. But hydroelectric is 24/7. It's much like coal in terms of its dependability, but the sort of carbon footprint of the hydroelectric power projects is much lower. Yes, constructing of these plants takes much longer. It is more cost effective, and there is a carbon footprint associated with large heavy constructions. But over a period of time, over a 20 to 25-year period, sometimes even longer, the first major hydroelectric power plant came up in Bhakra Nangal, in the foothills of the Ganges. And Bhakra Nangal has been going on for almost 70 years today, 65 to 70 years today, right? So these are projects that have a large shelf life. These are projects which can provide, in terms of capacity generation, much higher volumes. And as the world and as India looks at cleaner sources of energy when it comes to renewables, large hydro projects are something that need to be kept in mind, right? So here I spoke about that we need to increase fivefold in every 10 years, right, to move from 100 to 450. So where is that kind of leading to? I've taken a 3-month period over the last fiscal year: April, June, July, August, July, September, October, December, and January to March of this year. And we've seen the average sort of capacity addition only of solar rooftop is about 3 gigawatts, right? Only of renewable energy, which includes solar, both grid scale and rooftop, as well as wind, and a small part of small hydro and biomass, constitute about 3 gigawatts every 3 months. Right, that means we're talking about between 12 to 5 gigawatts per month. Now, obviously, the scale needs to be improved. If we are looking at getting from 100 to 450 gigawatts, that's 350 gigawatts over the next 10 years, we need to be looking more like instead of 12 gigawatts addition to 15 gigawatts addition per year, it needs to be 3 times that amount. We need to look at about 35 gigawatts of clean energy additions over the next 10 years. In terms of developers, in terms of the private sector is leading the fray. Adani Green Energy and SSE are the leading players when it comes to installation of clean energy. The other players are JSW and Renew Power. NTPC is one of the largest, is a public sector player, and today they are one of the largest sort of implementers. Not just NTPC. When people talk about NTPC, they talk about coal-fired plants or thermal plants, but in terms of a renewable source of energy, they are amongst the top three. Right. So I'll kind of not spend too much time on this. The slides are there for you to go over. This session I wanted to keep at around half an hour to about 35 minutes. We'll just spend a couple of minutes on the tariffs and the current economics that go through. The solar tariffs in India are currently one of the lowest in the world, at around 2 to 2.5 rupees per kilowatt hour. That translates to 26 to 35 cents per kilowatt hour, which is the lowest in the world. There was a solar auction that was held in early November in Gujarat, where we saw the tariff prices actually fall below $2 per kilowatt hour. They went at 1.99 rupees, 1 rupees 99 paisa for a fairly large 500 megawatt auction in Gujarat, right? Now, these sort of rates are not really sustainable. Even when you speak to developers, they take into account anywhere between a 10 to a 15% rate of return, and then work backwards to see what would be the solar tariff that the operator, whether it is NTPC, whether it is the state electricity board, they can provide. In order to increase, or in order to sort of develop the homegrown manufacturing capabilities, the government is increasing the customs duty between 30 to 40% on imported solar panels. The goods and service, or the GST tax, has been increased from 5% to 12%, and they for PV cells and panels, and this has kind of increased the actual project cost, right? The implementation cost or the development cost of setting up a solar plant in India ranges between 560,000 to 575,000 per megawatt hour. It's slightly lower now, but it's expected to reach that amount over the next fiscal. Hence, we see that from the current sort of rate, this could go up by another 10-15%, and the solar tariffs could settle anywhere between 2.6 to 2.8 rupees per kilowatt hour. That is about 37 cents, which again today is one of the lowest in the world. But those days of under 2 rupees per kilowatt hour of solar tariffs is not something that we're going to see in the long time. These are the tariffs that could effectively kind of stabilize over the next coming few years. All right, so this is where I'd like to stop for today. If there are any questions, I'm kind of happy to take them. Unlike yesterday, I don't want this to be a very long session. I think half an hour is a good time for everybody to absorb what's been said. We will be sharing these slides. The organizers will be sharing them. But if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them at this stage.
Thank you, sir. Participants, I would like to ask, if you are hesitating to ask the questions by unmuting, you can just text in the chat session also.
Right. I think this was fairly heavy for everybody. If there are any questions at the later stage, you can reach out to us through Advantage India, and I'll be happy to answer them once you've gone through the presentation details. Right. If there are no questions or if there are no queries, then we can bring the session to a close.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you for the wonderful session.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
so much.
participants.
Thank you.